All right, we'll go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover, but thank you everyone for coming to our last episode in the How to Build a POCUS program webinar series. This webinar will be on quality assurance. My name is Rachel Weinstein. I'm a second-year fellow at Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago, and I'm thrilled to be moderating this event. We're very lucky to have our primary speakers today, Dr. Karina Lawrence and Dr. Shazia Bombal. Dr. Bombal is an associate professor of pediatrics at Emory University and an attending physician in the neonatal intensive care unit at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. She's building a point of care ultrasound program at Emory. She previously initiated and ran a POCUS program at the Stanford NICU in Palo Alto, California, as well as led POCUS courses at Stanford since 2019. Dr. Bombal has participated in teaching national courses in POCUS and functional neonatal echocardiography since 2016. She's a member of the Pan American Hemodynamics Group and the Targeted Neonatal Echocardiography Special Interest Group within the American Society of Echocardiography. Our second speaker today, Dr. Karina Lawrence, is an assistant professor of pediatrics at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine and an attending physician in the NICU at UPMC Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. Dr. Lawrence's primary research interests include curriculum development, communication, and point-of-care ultrasound. She has a master's degree in medical education and designed a NICU POCUS curriculum and implemented the NICU POCUS program at her institution as a part of her graduate thesis work. She is a division lead for the UPMC Children's Hospital POCUS Standards Committee and provides frequent POCUS education to trainees and staff. On a national level, she is the faculty lead for the NeoFlip online POCUS education modules, which are currently in development. Thank you so much for being here today, Karina and Shazia, and I'll let you guys take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, just wanted to say a huge thanks to everybody for joining us again, as Rachel said, for our fourth installment in this webinar series. So our fourth and currently the final one that we have planned. That is all pending feedback that we get. But in our last session, Dr. Alan Groves discussed billing, coding, and credentialing. And I really thought that he left off at a great point for us to start talking about quality assurance, or QA. He left off by giving us a bit of a teaser by introducing the topic of image archiving. And that really is where QA starts. So in order to be able to review and improve upon our ultrasound skills, we really need to be able to save, review, and then also be able to reflect back upon our images and our resulting interpretations. So there are, as you can imagine, a ton of options for image storage, such as saving to your radiology, your PACS system, or perhaps your cardiologists have a different system and you can save to your echocardiography storage platform if you're doing functional echo. Maybe you also have a secure server that you can save your images to. Or maybe even at its very basic, you can save to the hard drive of your ultrasound machine. So like I said, there are multiple options to fit the capabilities and the needs of your individual programs. So much like there are tons of options for image archiving, there are a ton of options also for your approaches to quality assurance. So I think we can really start talking about it on a spectrum, essentially. And in broad strokes, I like to think about the spectrum as ranging from what I'm going to call real to the ideal. So what did real look like for me? When I was first starting our program, essentially we picked an application that we thought would be the highest yield for us, and we wanted to start small. So we picked central lines. And I think that's a common starting point for a lot of different programs. So as Rachel mentioned, I developed a curriculum as part of my graduate thesis work. And really I started off with a 10-year-old machine that had been sitting on our unit gathering dust. And so what we did is we really just started out with storing our images on the ultrasound hard drive. I tapped into a daily report that was already being generated from our data warehouse through Cerner. We were already getting daily reports on all of our central lines because we were tracking our central line days. So I was able to go ahead and use that report to serve my purposes, which was really tracking the ultrasounds for central lines. And in order to add a little bit of more QI data depth to the information that I was gathering, I created a central line data form, and I literally taped a paper copy of each one of these forms to every single umbilical and PICC line kit in our procedure cart. So that was what was the real for us in the beginning. The way that I reviewed things with folks is that I usually did it in person, whether it was at the time of the scan or shortly thereafter with the operator. And I kept a paper log of all these things. For the QI portion of things, I did apply through our IRB and also through our quality review committee to make sure that I had the proper permissions to collect all of that information. So like I said, that's where the real started for us. But I was lucky because I happened to be starting out right as things were really, really starting to ramp up here at Children's. We had a relatively new POCUS standards committee that was already in existence. It was young, it was already in existence, but they were really starting to organize the POCUS infrastructure across multiple collaborative disciplines. I was lucky enough to be able to join that team. And one of the big focuses really at the outset of when I joined that team was our chair was really tackling the image archiving issue and also our QA process. So like I said, I was really lucky that I hopped in to this process as it was already in motion. And we ended up going with QPath as our workflow platform. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. So that leads me to, since we've talked about the real, now we're talking about the ideal. So in contrast to paper and pen logs and local image storage, there are many so-called workflow solutions that are out there. And a lot of these are really multifunctional programs that help to integrate, say, your process for putting in orders for your ultrasounds, for storing your images, for QA, for reporting, maybe even also for billing. There are a ton out there, and I put up here on the screen 4 of some of the easiest ones that I was able to find on Google, one of which is QPath. But like I said, there are many out there, and these are just a few of them. At this point, I do think that it bears mentioning this disclaimer that we have no affiliation with any of these companies or any of these products. We are simply really just trying to convey our own experiences. We're not endorsing anything. We're just, like I said, trying to convey our experiences in hopes that maybe some of the trials and tribulations that we have gone through might help inform you guys as you progress through building your programs as well. So with that said, we ended up going with QPath for our workflow solution. And as a bit of an aside, we use Cerner as our EMR. I know it also does interface with Epic, but I just wanted to throw that out there as part of a consideration. So in QPath, there's tons of functionality, and really at its most basic level, it has the capabilities of image storage and also searching and filtering. But beyond that, it also goes into QA functionality, where it includes a series of worksheets where users can submit their image interpretation. You can also assign QI reviewers, right? And then that reviewer then gets a notification that they've got a scan to review. And then that reviewer can then fill out their own QA worksheet to weigh in on the quality of the scan and the user's interpretation. Another key feature is being able to export your data, right? So this can be used for any number of different applications. First things that come to mind, maybe tracking use, tracking indications, maybe filtering out information and printing out procedure logs, credentialing logs, perhaps even for QI data, depending on what kind of information you collect, using it for research. So like I said, there's tons of information that you can use the information for and export to whatever adaptable spreadsheet that you want to. So with that being a short introduction to just in general, one of the workflow platforms that's out there, the one that we happen to use, I think it really also does bear discussing some of the implications of implementing a sort of ideal workflow platform like this. And many thanks to my point of care ultrasound mentor here at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, Jennifer Marin, who is part of our emergency medicine program and is really the heart of POCUS here at CHP. She provided me with a wealth of information on the background and the groundwork that really went into implementation of QPath here at Children's. And I think she had such a wealth of knowledge that I think a lot of it would be really helpful for you guys as you're embarking on your QA exploration of needs. So as you're thinking about what your program is and what your program might need in terms of QA, taking it back to really thinking about the scope of what you're trying to accomplish, the scope of who you're trying to serve. Are you just establishing this for your division? Maybe your hospital, maybe your entire hospital system. And then also thinking back, what is the intended scope of use for a point of care ultrasound? Is it for education, medical decision-making, billable procedures, all of the above? Maybe all of the above, but not all of them right now. So maybe eventually. So thinking through those things, I think will really help inform who you need to work with in terms of stakeholders too, because really it's not just the purchase of a program, right? It's also an investment in resources, not just money, but also people and time too. So some stakeholders that you might think of including as you embark on your journey is really your C-suite folks, right? Because the funds have got to come from somewhere. And these multifunctional platforms are really not inexpensive. So there certainly would be safety in numbers, right? If you can make it a generalizable, a usable program for multiple subspecialists, then that may be more attractive to leadership, to the folks that are actually going to be putting up the funds for acquiring something like this. Another set of important stakeholders would be IT, right? Both your system IT and your radiology IT. Because these programs directly interface with major EMRs, right? So you're going to need people that are on both sides of that coin. Other folks to really make sure that you've got engaged or biomedical engineering, right? Because somebody has to troubleshoot your machine. They have to maintain the equipment. They have to do the upgrades that go along with it. Informatics is also an important team to have involved. There are EMR folks, and they can help with creating the orders that can then interface with your workflow system, creating your documentation, which is certainly going to be hugely important for quality assurance. And then billing too, if you're going to want to interface your billing with your QA work solution, you're going to need to make sure that you're meeting your institution's requirements for your imaging and documentation in terms of archiving. Here at UPMC, we were really lucky at Children's that our health system was already interested in purchasing QPath. So it was more that they contacted us and said that we are enterprise-wide going to purchase this system for us to use at all of our hospitals, which was a fantastic resource for us. Up until then, I believe it was only our emergency medicine department that was using some sort of a workflow system. And it was the older Sonosite workflow system, which I believe was just retired earlier this year. It was called SWS. And they had actually purchased that at the time that they purchased their equipment. So they bought it on their own with their purchase, which does bring us to the question of funding, really. Like I said, we were lucky that UPMC was already talking about doing this, right? So they bought it as an enterprise with X number of licenses. And we advocated, well, Jen advocated for having a certain fraction of those licenses dedicated to CHP. It helps having multiple licenses. It makes it cleaner in terms of data storage and being able to filter things, but you can share licenses. And so that's one of the ways that we went about essentially getting more bang for our buck. So, but certainly banding together is very helpful because we know that there's safety in numbers. So if you can grab a group, make a team, make this more generalizable or widely usable, then I think it becomes a more attractive option because it's certainly not an inexpensive way to go about it. So we talked a little bit about the real, we talked a little bit about the ideal, but what falls in between, right? So I like to call this the messy middle. And I do that with all the love in my heart because the messy middle is really where most of us find ourselves, right? And this really is the zone of opportunity and creativity. And many, many options exist, right? Mix and match the resources that you've got. Maybe you'll have folks store images on your machine, then fill out a short survey on Qualtrics or RedCap or Microsoft Forms. Maybe you'll export your data to an Excel spreadsheet. Maybe you'll have a shared spreadsheet and just have people just enter data into that directly. Maybe you'll review images in real time as opposed to using the worksheets like on QPath. Or maybe you'll have one-on-one in-person sessions, or maybe it'll be a group session whether it's in person or by video conference, but whatever method you choose or whatever combination of resources you choose to work with, make it work for you in multiple ways. Meaning create a method that you can also then leverage for additional goals, right? For your procedure logs, for your QI research, maybe for housing your teaching files. So like I said, the messy middle where most of us live, there are so many options there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shazia, who is going to tell us about her QA journey.
I'm coming. There we go. I like that messy middle that Karina talks about. We definitely had a bit of a messy middle, but I'll take you through. So when you think about stages of program development maintenance, and we've kind of gone through these with the webinars, but needs assessment, what do you need in your unit? How do you get through training competency? And as part of that, we have the quality assurance arm of it. So I'll talk, as Karina said, about our journey through quality assurance and how we moved it through that. Next slide, Karina. So there were many options for POCUS in the NICU, and we're thinking about how to achieve quality and how to really start this program off. We wanted to do things I felt comfortable with. So I felt pretty comfortable with doing lines. And also we wanted to be able to look at bladders and be able to do bladder taps. We actually didn't have a vascular probe or a linear probe when we started initially the program. So we didn't start with lines just yet. We had the our RNTSs, or our vascular access nurses, were starting to use it in the NICU, but that didn't start right when we started. So we utilized machines and the availability that we had. Next slide. So in the beginning, we had a notebook, and it was a red notebook. I remember, I don't think it was quite this one, but we had a notebook that we used because the machines that we got were machines from our cardiology hand-me-downs, which were fine, but the M Turbo shut down in the middle of images sometimes, and we're taking studies and we couldn't really save. So I don't know if you can play this image, Karina, but this is how we saved some of our images on here. This was doing a line check and some pretty interesting saving it. This is how we saved at the time. When we logged on, as Karina had, we got a printout of all the central lines that we had, and this was before COVID. So 3 times a week, a member of our team would go into the unit and look at UV lines and document in the notebook, and then save our images. Next slide. So as we developed our program, the things we wanted to do from a QA development is we really knew we needed to review these images. And if we wanted people to be able to get feel that they had sort of our own internal credentialing and was able to move forward, then we needed to have review sessions. We needed to have how many did they need to do, what did they need to attend from a review session standpoint. So we did give feedback, but we required them, if they were going to do ultrasound the unit, to perform the ultrasounds, log, and review. And with that, we needed to figure out a better way of having a review system. We also wanted them to attend at least 2 image review sessions a year, and then 25 non-procedure with confirmatory testing or pre-review and feedback. So we ended up having POCUS teams weekly. We started off doing program development, QA, and research, and kind of did QA. We were starting off once a month, and then we got busier, and so we ended up doing it once or twice a month. Next slide, Karina. And so our QA process, we ended up from that notebook developing a REDCap database, and this was phoning friends and seeing how did people create databases and what had they utilized. So CHOP had provided their database. They're wonderful with sharing their information. Alan Groves had some really nice resources that he had available, and we kind of took different things and adjusted things over the year. Like Karina had, we did go through the IRB as just an IRB exempt, saying that we're doing this a QI for a REDCap database, and so we had that as a REDCap database. And then once we got our machines, and the machines that we had in the unit were the GE Venue Go, and we did the P9 initially just because the Venue Go didn't have the availability of the smaller probes at the time when we started the program. So with that, because we didn't have, can you go back 1 second? Because we didn't have we didn't have a system to be able to utilize, we had to use REDCap. So those little things hanging are actually the QR codes that we hung QR codes from each of the machines so they could be scanned by the person doing the study. And we also, Caroline, if you go to the next slide, Caroline No, who's a fellow at the time, who's now at CHLA, I think is on this call here, did phenomenal things with REDCap and with QR codes and all these links that make things so easy. And we created a REDCap database that allowed us, because we didn't have a centralized way of doing this with QPath or with going to the PACS system. So we created a REDCap that was initially just with NICU, and then we began to partner with NICU as we branched out and needed some more help with QI. and expertise. Then we added the PICU onto ours as well. So it was, Caroline had really adjusted this over the years as we thought about things that we wanted to add on to our QI process, and it allowed us to have sort of a repository of information that we were able to access, and comments and images that we could, or studies that we can find by putting keywords. And so we had on here, there was the clinical, which is educational. And we would tell them whoever was doing the ultrasound, if you didn't record on REDCap, you didn't do it, because we don't have any record that you did it in there. And we have the images, but nothing associated with it. Is it a NICU or PICU? Who's a provider? Who's a supervisor? And that's kind of a way that you also tracked who was supervising, and whether you had enough as a fellow or as a practitioner, whoever was doing them. We could query REDCap for names and be able to see who had all the ultrasounds they needed. And then we would get more specific with what we wanted the procedure log, and that was for QA assessment. We had protocols also that kind of went along with this to make sure we were all getting all the things we wanted for lung ultrasound, for UV lines, and so we tried to get it fairly specific and kept adjusting. And Caroline was very patient with us as we did that over time. Next slide. Because we didn't have, so with the systems, when you have a system that allows for your images to go downloading into radiology or into QPath and into the whatever system that you have, then you likely have a wireless capability of being able to take your images, and they go, you do the image and they wirelessly get to a storage archive system. So we didn't have that. So every week, Reedy Dasani, who's here, who's our POCUS coordinator, is phenomenal, and actually is doing some research, nice research projects with us. So she each week would download the images into a hard drive and then go to a secure laptop. We initially tried to upload them to our web-based system, so our box system, but we had too many images and overload, and they said you can't do that anymore. So then we did it to a separate archiving, say, a computer and a program that we had, DICOM server we had. And then we ended up reviewing towards, when I was leaving Stanford, about reviewed every 1 to 2 weeks, Thursdays 12 to 2, and we did this by Zoom. So I wish I had a picture of us on Zoom, but Reedy would, I think if you go to the next one, so Reedy would have the images download, so we'd see the image review, and then we had, this is our Excel spreadsheet that we created. You'd look at the REDCap database, information REDCap database, and then we had a spreadsheet for each of the different modalities that we looked at, or even areas that we looked at, and then had different things that we looked at within each that kind of went along with protocols we developed. So we could track if we thought that these were reasonable studies, that we have good image quality, and I'll credit Alan with some of the work that he had done with his protocols, or his what he had set up for an QA system, harking back to some of the echo for image quality, which was really helpful, and we incorporated under our QA process as well. So brightness, depth, penetration, we included that on our QA processes as well. Next one. And so when we did the QA process, we would document who the patient was, a little bit of information about them, who reviewed it, when did we review it, and then for this one, for umbilical lines, did we see all of these things? On the REDCap database was a question at the end that said, do you want us to get back to you on reviewing if there was a particular question they had? Otherwise, if there was a big discrepancy, we'd get back to the initial person who did the study, just to make sure we have pretty quick feedback for them. And we were always available if in live they had questions. We're always available to answer if any questions came up. So this is how we ended up doing the QA process, and we'd have, by the end, it was about 5 to 10 ultrasounds a week that we had to go through. And so we'd get through these, and then we try to, if there are fellows that had a particular amount that they wanted to review, then we'd do some review of the fellows, particularly at certain QA review sessions. Next one. So when we started, I mentioned we started with central line access, and that's what I felt comfortable with, and the cardiac imaging I felt more comfortable with, so I was able to do the QA process on that one. And we focused on that and then bladder, but as we started to develop out more, we needed more expertise from a QA standpoint. So we started to partner with the PICU. We had radiology come in and help us as well. And so they joined our QI sessions, and PICU was really more of the consistency. Burkett was one of the PICU docs who's involved with SCCM, and he's been a phenomenal partner with us. So he would partner with us for QA sessions. And so if we had a bunch of lung ultrasounds we'd go over with him, and he'd help us to adjudicate that. And that's something to think about if you are trying to figure out, and this question's come up before, who's going to help with QA sessions. It's potentially whoever's in your institution is probably the easiest accessible and most helpful, just thinking about confidentiality and all. So that's helpful to figure out. So we utilized our PICU folks to help with that. And so when we initially started, we did a lot of central access, and then we kind of did less. And then if you go to the next slide, as we would, okay. So anyways, so yeah, so then we utilized multiple disciplinary resources, and we ended up having a lot of different people that were interested in POCUS and wanting to help with some of the process and program management we're having. So these are all experts that we could call on if we had questions from a QA standpoint on our imaging and what are we seeing. Next one. And so that allowed us to grow and say that we were now could be able to do other things as well. And we had availability from when our expertise built up as we started to do more ultrasound, felt more comfortable and confident with reading our own. But that came from having other experts who were more comfortable join our QA meetings, so that we could make sure that we were reviewing these images well, and that we were giving feedback appropriately as well. Next slide. So it takes the village, and so at Stanford now, Burkett is the PICU lead, Alexis is NICU, Faith is one of the NICU fellows, and we also incorporate quite a bit of NPs. And Shelby, Christina, and Jackie were awesome NPs that took on very early on. Christina and Shelby were there from the beginning of when we first went to the CHOP course and learned, and they really took ownership and have done so many ultrasounds at this point. And it's been great from educational and also from a QA and QI standpoint and for teaching. We've had coordinators, and we had a lot of help, and then radiology and cardiology, we had contacts through there that were also very useful to have. And then if you go to the next slide. Right now at Emory, we've incorporated with CV folks, PZMP Gutierrez has been an awesome resource for us, both for QA processing as well as for just learning education. And then the PICU has been really good founders, mentees, or collaborators as well. And then if you go to the next slide. And the reason I say that it's so important to have, and Karina has talked about this as well, is to have multiple people helping, is that really POCUS is a team sport within the unit. So involving not just the physicians, but the frontline, the NPs, huge as well when you're trying to roll out this program, that you need to have the training, continuing education, and quality assurance is going to be a big part of that, not only to make sure that we're doing justice to this program, and that we're actually from a knowledge base, both understanding what we're seeing and doing it appropriately, doing the image quality appropriately, but also from an educational standpoint to make sure that we're training people who will be learning the elements that are needed for appropriate ultrasounding. And then buy-in from the department and hospital level really is integral. It's important to be able to get that for really be able to get these kind of more programs that will be able to centralize it easier and not have so much manpower to do things like downloading images and doing this REDCap. That there are other better ways to do this. And what's helpful and we brought to here is to take that paper that Maki's on, the AAP one from a couple months ago, talking about the use of point-of-care ultrasound for the NICU. And this is the QR code is for, there's two papers in here, the technical and the clinical. This is for the clinical portion to say this is how you set up a program, and saying that we do need POCUS within here, and we need machines, we need QA processes. And if you can partner with others within the institution, then there's more divisions and departments that need a centralizing access or centralizing archiving system, and that is really strike the numbers. And it is a cost, and that's what kind of held up a lot of it, was the cost, not just for the program itself, if you're going for an outside program, but also for IS. Many of the programs in our CHOP is a program, and we're looking at in this here at Emory, so hopefully this is going to work through, is to be able to get an EPIC order set that it actually has an ascension number, and then images will then get uploaded into the PACS system for radiology, which is a great way to be able to do that. But you still need an IS build, so to have support from the hospital and support from the department is still important with that, because it takes IS time, and that can be a bit of a hindrance. But the more people that you have together to try to put this together and say that this is a need, and as there are initiatives coming out saying that, for example, with central lines, or with line access, you need to have, at Stanford, I believe, you needed to have 2 modes of identification, make sure you have a line in the vessel. If you have to have POCUS as part of your, as part of one team's need for a procedure, then they need a way to be able to save those images and put them in a chart. So if they need it, then we all should be able to do that together and get one system that works for everybody. So trying to phone a friend and find friends within the institution, both for trying to get resources as well as for your QA development, is certainly helpful. So 1 is a lonely number, but not having anyone doing POCUS is even worse. So at least getting started, even if you're alone doing it, there are people within the institution who can help with that. Next slide, Karina. And so I think that's it, actually. So we'll open it up now. If the moderator, the panel can open up their, can turn on their screens. And I think Alan is on here, is up here as well. He's on the sheet. But we'll be happy to answer any questions. I know there are others that Magino has a different workflow that works well for them that they've used. And the other thing that I forgot to mention, for the image saving, if you do want to get the images in the chart, the way that we've done it and the way that I know anesthesia have done this here is they've uploaded and saved it onto Haiku on the phone so that it can upload into the patient's chart, so that there is a potential mechanism to get it into a chart if you don't have an automatic download. But just some considerations. Thank you.
So for best viewing of the Q&A expert panel, we recommend going into speaker view, and feel free to send your questions to Kara Beth Carr and myself, and we'll filter them through for our experts. Apart from Karina, we know we used QPath, and Shazia, you were using kind of RedCap to log. Does anyone else have any experience with other software that's compatible with their EMR process for their QA process at their institution?
Well, at CHOP, we don't use QPath. Unfortunately, I know it's a very easy software, but CHOP doesn't support that. So what we are doing is we are just placing orders. You know, we work with the IS and the machines are connected to Epic. So we place orders through Epic, and they just show up on the machine, and then they get uploaded to the patient's chart. And then we report them officially on the patient's chart.
That sounds like a great system, Mackie. Is the downside to that you just sort of can't collate all the scans and so on in the same way as QPath does?
No, there is no downside. I mean, I know I haven't even tried QPath, but I've heard that it's very user friendly. But no, we've gone through Epic, and this is what the hospital has been supporting, which is great, because every scan, you know, gets uploaded and documented in the patient's chart. Even any educational scan, we put an order for an educational ultrasound. Sorry, my voice is not good.
What this issue of image archiving is one that most centers struggle with, and as both the speakers today mentioned, I think using the power of multiple divisions is helpful. Speaking to your cardiology colleagues, speaking to your radiology colleagues, trying to find any way to make it happen, because I don't, you know, I've had images stored in a Singo cardiology server in sites. I've had images stored in a pediatrics Ambra server. I've had images go straight to PACS. It matters to me, it matters much less where they go than you get them somewhere. And waiting for the perfect workflow with QPath, which I think is great. I think GE Viewpoint is worth a look as well. It does a lot of things that QPath does. I think there's lots of options, but it's about finding what your own hospital ITIS service will support. But lots of different ways of doing it.
Yeah, the way we did was through radiology and IS. And now, we do have templates per study, so we don't have to write it up, every week that we report them weekly. So so we have friends in informatics who are actually doing that for us, which is very helpful.
And I think there is an ability to do partial builds out. So I think like with QPath, you can get the archiving system, but not necessarily connected to Epic right away. So there's potential for that. And for, as Karina said, sharing of licensing. So if we had a trouble with this, I said, we tried to sit, because the adult ED at Stanford had QPath. So we thought, well, we're attached. Can't we just use the same licensing? And unfortunately, we couldn't just use the same licensing, but it's worth thinking about if there are other divisions within the hospital that are using an archiving system, maybe getting on their licensing and seeing if that's feasible.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, at the start of the program, were the images reviewed in live time by the experts or main POCUS faculty, or were they reviewed at a later time?
The ones, if everyone wanted to act on the images, they needed to be reviewed live. So live and in person. For the educational and all that, we would do them afterwards, but if they were going to act on them until they had their credentialing, until they had their number of ultrasounds, they had to be reviewed live before they could act.
Yeah, I was going to say it was a little bit of both at the beginning. But those that were done, I mean, for a clinical reason, they were reviewed, of course, real time. But those studies were didn't require any clinical intervention or decision after the study. What we were doing, this is many years ago, we were downloading weekly from the machine into a flash drive. And then we were hooking that into our shared drive. So everyone would have access to that, and we will review them weekly. Yeah.
I mean, that's still the way we're doing it now, Bucky. So I'm glad you
That's where
moved
we're
on.
doing it. All of our fellows have USBs, and they download everything to their USB and their hard drive, and we review them.
Oh, that's an interesting way.
Our next question is there a recommended standard set of POCUS worksheets for each POCUS study?
I think this question, are you getting at the exam worksheets and the QA worksheets that I mentioned in QPath? That's what I'm wondering. Because I also did get a question into the chat that was specifically asking about creating worksheets. And I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination in the worksheets. I actually have an appointment with our IT QPath gurus to try and create some NICU specific worksheets for us. But it looks like when I go into QPath, you can select from any number of worksheets in there, and it looks like you can create division specific ones, but there are templated ones that are already in there. So something, say, for like an abdominal scan, abdominal limited, vascular access, lower extremity vascular line. It looks like there are templated ones in there, but if you're specifically asking if there are standards for NICU, I think that the short answer is no. I don't know that we really have for.
I think the only ones I've put in the shared drive are UVC and PIC. I think those are both in there as Word documents. So I have one somewhere for cardiac ultrasounds, though I don't particularly want to put that in because I don't want to encourage people to be doing structural cardiac ultrasounds while they're doing POCUS. But I would certainly encourage, this is a nice area where if anybody has anything, please just email it to us and let us drop it in there, because there's, we all need the same things here. If somebody wants to modify the ones that are in there for lung or peripheral vascular access, for example, I think that would be great to use the common structure and then drop them back into the shared folder.
And the share folder that Alan is referencing, Cara Beth Carr just put a link to it in the chat for all of you who are not familiar with it.
Great. Our next question is for the educational scans that go directly into the patient chart. Maki, does CHOP have a consent process with the families or a blanket consent statement for POCUS scans?
Yeah, for educational scans, we do ask for verbal consent. So same thing, when we do didactics for fellows, we go in groups, we do educational scans, so we do ask the parents, but it's just verbal. Yeah.
And do you put those in the patient's chart, Maki? We don't.
Yeah, because they get uploaded to PACS immediately through this POCUS educational order. Yeah. So every single image, it doesn't matter what you're getting it for, has to go to the patient's chart.
Yeah, Alan, we don't put our educational charts or educational scans in the chart either. And I thought that that was actually a really nice way that Jen devised how to use QPath for both like medical decision making and educational use is by using its sort of interface with our ordering system, because it really is an intermediary, right, between the ultrasound machine and your PAC system, or it can be. So for us, if an order is actually placed in the EMR, it gets transferred to the to QPath. We go into QPath and we can then access that patient information, and then we can scan, and then directly from there it gets uploaded into the PAC system. But if we don't put an order in, like say it's an educational scan, then it just lives in QPath alone. It doesn't actually go to our PAC system.
Right, we do put orders because if I'm not mistaken, I mean, legally, any image you get from a patient belongs to the patient chart. So that's why we do it that way. And everyone will be able to review them at any time.
Are you then, Maki, able to use Epic to track POCUS procedures and scans for individual providers for credentialing purposes as well?
Yeah, so I was going to say that because it was funny how you, Karina, said that the messy middle. I was laughing because, the more people we add into our program, the more messy it gets, right? And at the beginning, we used to use a red cap, log. So everyone would just log in there. And then, the fellows came in, and then now the fellows has different system where they log in a different place. And I had to accept that. Okay, well, and now, I have people logging into RedCap, some other through the fellows, and some other people that are not logging anything. But I guess the best way of doing this is that, I could search on Epic all the orders that were placed. I mean, it's not that, it's easier for me if I have RedCap, right? Because I have to ask someone to go to Epic. But yeah, everything at the end, is logged through Epic. Yeah.
For your QA purposes, if you notice like specific discrepancies or deficiencies that require improvement, how do you approach the person who performed the scan in order to do education and make scans better going forward?
We would ask them, go over the image with them, but we would ask them come to review session and then pick some of their images and be able to go over with them. And then also have some time to be able to do hands-on. So that's how we would approach it. I mean, they wouldn't be images that they acted on already, unless they were ones we just want a slight improvement on, but that's how we do it.
Yeah, in our case, so we review all the images done in the NICU every week, every Thursday. So we ask people who've done, scans that want, during that week, that please log into our meeting for real-time feedback. So this is how we do it. Sometimes, if the fellow doesn't log or the attending who did it is not present, then we just talk to them or email them for feedback.
Does anyone use a standardized taxonomy system for diagnostic errors like type, severity, preventability, or it's just sort of based off of the conversations that you have at your individual set?
Yeah, again, we have a structure for that in our shared, that's in the Dell Children's standard operating procedures document, I think, has a standardized template for type and severity of, I think it says error. I think it says diagnostic error, but I would have to check. Sorry, I don't have my laptop nearby. I find that somewhat restrictive as a process, but I would be keen to hear other suggestions for that. But at the minute, yes, we have a somewhat formalized process for that. I have to say, I'm not sure I've ever used it, because touch wood, we haven't done anything that was at that level that we thought really needed to be documented to that extent.
I know we've talked about sort of collaboration between different divisions. Does anyone else have any other input about specific disciplines or persons that sit on your individual QA committees that you found to be very helpful at your institution?
I mean, currently we use the pediatric ER attending who is credentialed in point of care ultrasound. He's been essentially the essential one for our process. And we've recently added one of the PICU attendings and had one of our NICU cardiologists previously.
I think it's a really nice opportunity for collaboration across divisions. So we're only just setting this up at the minute, but one of our ED attendings is going to review my images and I'm going to review his images. And it's a nice way to build links. You keep hearing it takes a village. That's a good way to do it.
And then as we wrap up our session here, if anyone wants to share what has been the most challenging part of the QA process so far, as an effort to try to help launch our participants forward in building their QA programs, that would be really helpful.
I think for us, it was just being patient to take the time to make a system that worked within some of the restrictions that we had. So that REDCap database didn't get it built over a day. It took us a bit to put that together. I know we've all had iterations of how things worked, but that and then trying to find your allies that can help you with the QA. So even identify one person, and that was finding someone within the PICU for us that was willing to help, and we were able to provide some structure with the REDCap database, and they were to provide the expertise. So it was mutually beneficial, and we all enjoyed ultrasound and we're excited about it. So trying to find that person that can help, that has experience, is a way to start with things.
I agree, starting the process with, finding someone who's as excited as you are about ultrasound in that process. And it's all very frustrating and timely, but accepting the messy middle, I really do like that terminology. Accepting the messy middle and the frustrations that come along with it is key.
We will sneak in one more question that just came through. Speaking of the time dedication that it takes, one of our participants is asking if you get any protected or extra time for quality assurance at your institution.
Well, that's something very important, and I think is needed, because if you, like in my case, I am the director of the POCUS program in the NICU, and I did get admin time for that. It really requires a lot of time, so you better fight for that and get some protected time to develop the program and to do it the right way.
Yeah, I didn't initially have time to do that. It built up as we saw that we were getting busier. And we actually got in for a grant, and the grant allocated some time through a grant to be able to do that. But I mean, with the paper that Maki has come out with the AAP, that is the ability to go to the leadership, hopefully be able to say, you need to have a director for point of care. And so to do that, here are the things that you need, and QA is a big part of it. It does, as Maki said, it takes a lot of time. I was on meetings for QA, for program development, for teaching. It's a lot of time commitment. So you will get some time, but also know that this is a time commitment. So if you can get time, but hopefully that paper will help. It really does stem from the AAP. You need to be able to structure and do this. And to do it well, you've got to have some time.
On behalf of everyone, I just want to say thank you so much to Shazia and Karina for speaking with us today, as well as to our expert panel. I think this has been a really helpful discussion in how you can begin to approach QA for multiple different vantage points and softwares. To everyone who came today, we would really appreciate it if you filled out our very brief survey giving us feedback. And I know this is the last planned webinar for our series, but based upon your feedback, we'd love to coordinate potentially more sessions for you. So thanks everyone for coming, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.